Welcome to NightStoryX Fear, where every whisper hides a secret and every story leaves a scar. If you dare to listen, then like, share, and subscribe before the darkness takes you. And tell us in the comments what haunts you the most. NightStoryX Fear, where fear never sleeps.
Story 1. The Spliced Silence of the Data Vault. The only sound inside the Sub-Level 4 Data Vault, miles beneath a decommissioned missile silo repurposed into a server farm near the desolate, wind-swept border of Nebraska and Wyoming, was the constant low-frequency hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic, controlled dripping of condensation, a mechanical heartbeat that was the only company for Elias during his solitary 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. maintenance shift, a highly specialized, highly paid job he had taken because no one else could tolerate the crushing isolation of working alone in a facility built for nuclear resilience, but now dedicated to archiving sensitive, highly encrypted government data. A setting so secure that once the colossal blast doors sealed at midnight, he was physically and electronically cut off from the outside world, a total silence that amplified every minute sound and drove a persistent low-level paranoia into his mind. His routine involved checking the temperature and humidity of the massive, cathedral-like halls of servers, a task made unsettling by the fact that he was traversing acres of cold concrete and steel, where the only illumination came from the green and amber indicator lights of millions of hard drives, lights that seemed to shift and pulse in the periphery. And the unique American element here was the sheer, terrifying scale of decommissioned military infrastructure, now serving a technological purpose, combining the fear of being buried alive with the fear of digital invasion. The facility's security protocols were ironclad. Motion sensors were disabled during maintenance, leaving only Elias's flashlight beam to pierce the absolute darkness, and access required a retina scan and a 6-digit code that changed hourly, a system that should have made trespass impossible. Yet on Tuesday night, as Elias was logging the temperature readings in Sector Delta, a wing that had been entirely mothballed and powered down for 5 years, he heard a sound that didn't belong, a faint, sharp click, the unmistakable sound of a rack panel being unscrewed. Freezing mid-step, Elias cut his flashlight, plunging the vast server hall into blackness so complete it felt physical, and pressed himself against a cold concrete pillar, his heart hammering against his ribs, because no one, absolutely no one, was authorized to be in Delta, and he was supposed to be the only soul in the entire facility. The clicking sound came again, closer this time, methodical and patient, followed by a faint, wet squelching that made Elias's stomach churn, and he knew instantly this was not a person, because no breathing human could be generating that sickening sound in that sterile environment. He flicked his light back on, revealing nothing in the immediate area, but as he scanned the rows, he saw something horrifyingly impossible, a single, thin wire, perfectly silver and almost invisible, stretching tautly between 2 dark server racks in the distance, a wire that hadn't been there moments ago. Terrified, he began to retreat, moving silently backward, but the clicking started following him,
faster now, sometimes sounding right behind his shoulder, sometimes ahead, seeming to jump through the darkness, and the squelching noise intensified, morphing into a sound that suggested something wet and soft was being dragged across the concrete floor, a sound that made his mind conjure images of exposed organs and raw flesh. He sprinted back toward the central control room, sealing the heavy reinforced door behind him with a frantic slam and locking it with the internal pneumatic deadbolts, finally allowing himself to breathe as he stared at the security monitor, which showed only the static image of the locked hallway outside his door. That's when the horror truly began. The control room's speakers, which relayed all internal audio feeds, emitted a sudden piercing burst of static, followed by a perfect crystalline recording of his own desperate, gasping breath from just moments ago, spliced and looped, and then a cold, synthesized voice speaking with the chilling, flat intonation of a text-to-speech program whispered directly into the room. "Elias, you shouldn't have been in Sector Delta. You heard the silence." The audio feed cut out, but now, originating from the server racks inside the control room, a new sound began, the sharp, singular click of a rack panel being unscrewed, and Elias looked down to see a perfectly silver wire, thin as surgical thread, emerge from the back of the computer console he was standing at, coiling slowly like a snake along the floor, realizing with a paralyzing dread that whatever was hunting him hadn't been confined to the dark halls, but had simply listened to his panic, spliced its way through the cables and the fiber optics, and had finally arrived to silence the one thing it truly hated: sound.
Story 2. The Watcher in Unit 119. The High Prairie storage facility was a maze of identical corrugated steel boxes bathed in the sodium vapor glow of perimeter lights, sitting just off a major interstate exit in the sprawling, featureless suburbs of Texas, a place where people paid to lock away things they couldn't bear to keep or couldn't bear to throw away. And this was the lonely kingdom of Alex, the night manager who worked his 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift alone, patrolling the silent aisles in his golf cart, the American dream of private property reduced to cheap rentable vaults, each one a potential casket for someone else's secrets. Alex's job was usually monotonous, consisting only of logging gate entry codes and making sure no one slept in their unit, but the isolation was unnerving. He was surrounded by thousands of forgotten possessions, each unit a muffled mystery. The facility had been plagued by strange minor anomalies lately, a lock found clipped and lying on the ground, a single unit door left inexplicably ajar, always quickly dismissed as user error or wind, until the night the alarms tripped on Unit 119, a standard 10 by 10 space located deep in the oldest, darkest block of the facility, a unit that had been rented by a shell corporation with a P.O. box address that never responded to calls. When Alex arrived, he found the lock intact, but the metal door was slightly bowed outward, the magnetic sensor reporting an open circuit despite the latch being perfectly sealed, a violation that required immediate inspection. Slipping his master key into the heavy-duty lock, Alex pulled open Unit 119, expecting to find a stack of forgotten furniture or moldy banker boxes, but instead found the unit completely, disturbingly empty, save for a single cheap wooden chair placed precisely in the center of the concrete floor, facing the open door. and sitting on the chair was an old, heavy, black rotary telephone, the kind that hasn't been used in decades, impossibly connected to nothing, its cord simply snipped off at the base. Alex was paralyzed by the sight, the setup possessing a horrifying theatricality that transcended simple trespass. And as he stood there, his flashlight beam fixed on the phone, the metal shell of the phone began to vibrate, and the ringer let out a single deafening old-fashioned bring that echoed through the empty steel halls, despite the phone having no power source and no line. Throwing the phone to the floor, Alex fled, sealing the unit again and locking it, his mind screaming that this was impossible. But as he drove his golf cart away, the empty unit, the intercom system, the one used for emergency announcements, came to life with a blast of static, followed by a soft, clear voice that sounded disturbingly close, emanating from the speaker mounted directly on the outside of Unit 119. The voice was emotionless, almost computerized, and it delivered a string of highly specific details about Alex's lonely existence. "You didn't eat dinner, Alex, just that stale donut. Your father hasn't called in 3 weeks. You check Unit 44 every night, hoping the girl who rented it will return." The voice knew everything, and the sheer, intimate nature of the surveillance was more terrifying than any ghost. He realized that the chair wasn't for someone to sit on, but for someone to watch from, and the empty unit was deliberately designed as a soundstage. Over the next hour, as Alex desperately tried to call the police from the disconnected landline in the office, his cell signal uselessly weak, the intercom system played audio snippets of things Alex had said and done in the complete privacy of his own home earlier that day, chillingly accurate and perfectly edited, until finally the intercom began to play a recording of Alex breathing, his own ragged, terrified inhalation and exhalation, and the voice returned, now a barely audible whisper, issuing one final paralyzing threat. "You closed the door on 119, Alex, but we've seen everything you keep locked in your unit." Alex didn't have a storage unit, but the statement chilled him to his core, hinting that the Watcher saw his secrets not in steel and concrete, but in the hidden vaults of his own mind. And as he stared at the security monitor, he saw a single dark shadow detach itself from the shadows between the rows and begin walking slowly towards the office, leaving the chilling implication that the Voyager had finally stepped out of Unit 119 and was coming to observe him face to face, forcing him to confront the dark, curated secrets that people keep locked away in the anonymous landscape of American suburbia. Story 3. The Altitude Sickness of the Black Peak Lookout. Perched atop Black Peak, a crumbling cinder cone in the vast, remote isolation of the Payette National Forest in Idaho, the Fire Lookout Tower was a tiny glass-enclosed box built in the 1930s, accessible only by a 4-hour hike or a difficult helicopter drop. And for Liam, the seasonal ranger assigned the summer shift, it was a dream job that quickly became a nightmare of profound, crushing solitude. The nearest human voice 50 miles away, reachable only by a temperamental radio. The silence of the high altitude so total it pressed in on his eardrums. And the unique American element was the romanticized yet brutal reality of the solitary Forest Service life, surrounded by millions of acres of ancient, unforgiving wilderness. The tower was designed for observation, its walls all glass, giving Liam a 360-degree, overwhelming view of endless rolling green peaks and valleys, a vista that offered no escape, only constant vigilance. And after 3 weeks of working alone, the sensory deprivation was warping his perception. The wind-battered trees below seemed to group themselves into shapes, the clouds appeared to hold faces, and the static on the radio occasionally coalesced into fleeting, barely intelligible whispers. His duties involved using the antique Osborne Firefinder, a circular map with sighting mechanisms to plot potential smoke. But the real terror began not with fire, but with something moving on the map itself. One night, around 2 a.m., after a long, stressful day of tracking a false alarm, Liam looked down at the Firefinder's map, a detailed relief of the surrounding peaks, and saw a single minute pinhole of light, impossibly small and intensely bright, flickering near the boundary marked unsurveyed terrain, a deep, inaccessible gorge known locally as the Devil's Drain. Dismissing it as a reflection or altitude-induced hallucination, Liam wiped the map's surface, but the light remained, not on the glass, but seemingly under it, shining from within the paper itself, pulsing softly like a tiny trapped star. Over the next 3 nights, the pinhole of light began to move, slowly traversing the map, covering ground that Liam knew no human could navigate, its path erratic and impossible, avoiding all trails and existing structures. And Liam became obsessed, documenting its minute-by-minute progress in his logbook, the light moving steadily closer to Black Peak, his location. The psychological toll of watching this impossible phenomenon move toward his only sanctuary began to break him. He couldn't sleep, constantly peering out into the actual wilderness, comparing it to the map, convinced that whatever the light represented was not merely a shadow or an error, but an active, intelligent traveler utilizing impossible routes. The climax arrived when the small light on the map stopped, precisely at the base of the mountain he was standing on, just where the access trail began. Moments later, the tower radio, which had been silent for hours, crackled to life, not with static, but with a horrifyingly clear sound. The deliberate, rhythmic tap, tap, tap of metal boots striking the metal rungs of the ladder leading up the 70-foot tower. Paralyzed with fear, Liam watched the trapdoor below him, the sound growing louder, heavier, and slower with each ascending step, knowing that whatever entity represented by the light had navigated the impossible terrain, arrived at his precise location, and was now climbing to meet the only human in miles, forcing Liam to realize that his role wasn't just to spot fires, but to serve as the solitary, helpless witness for the things that only reveal themselves when the world is silent.